You're welcome to the Hillsborough County Court. It's the 16th of June, 2021, and there's a suspected murderer at the front of the pew delivering a passionate opening statement at his own murder trial. Ronnie O'Neal was convicted of multiple crimes, including the murders of his girlfriend and their 9-year-old daughter, as well as the attempted murder of his son. O'Neal was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, arson, 2 counts of aggravated child abuse, and resisting an officer without violence. He begins with his head lowered as he rubs his palms for a few seconds. If anyone in that courtroom thought he was battling emotions of remorse or guilt, they were in for the shock of their lives as Ronnie raised his head and raised his voice, speaking brazenly.
By the time it's all said and done, you will see who is the mass murderers in Tampa Bay.
During his trial in June 2021, prosecutors presented evidence that O'Neal had attacked his girlfriend with a shotgun before stabbing her to death. They also showed that he had beaten and stabbed his daughter to death and set their home on fire to cover up the crimes. O'Neal's son, who was 8 years old at the time of the attack, survived the ordeal but suffered serious injuries. He testified against his father and had to endure the ordeal of being interrogated by the criminal. However, O'Neal claimed that the evidence would show otherwise, saying,
"The evidence is going to show my son did not witness me viciously beat his mom to death."
So he puts his scarred son through the torturous ordeal of asking about that night, and this is how that conversation went.
Did I hurt you that night of this incident?
Yes.
I did. And how did I hurt you?
You stabbed me.
O'Neal, who continued to represent himself throughout the trial, argued that he was not responsible for the crimes and that his girlfriend had killed their daughter before attacking him. However, the jury ultimately found him guilty on all charges. The judge who handed down the sentence described O'Neal's actions as unspeakable and inhumane and said that he had shown no remorse for his crimes. In his last statement before the sentencing, he began to raise his voice again until he was cautioned by the judge. He said,
"I am not sorry for something I didn't do, and I am not sorry for the things I did do."
The judge said this was the worst case she had ever seen as far as the facts go. As she began to give her judgment, O'Neal looked back and smiled, shaking his head. As she read the life sentences one after the other, he continued to look up at the ceiling. He looked defiant and unbothered, then walked out immediately after the sentencing was done. O'Neal was sentenced to 3 life sentences without the possibility of parole for the murders of his girlfriend and daughter. He was also given an additional 60 years in prison for the attempted murder of his son and other crimes. Next is the federal courthouse, downtown Baltimore, where another man is standing trial for his alleged involvement in multiple murders. Montana Baronet is a known gang member, and in 2017, he was one of 8 members of the Train to Go gang who were charged with first and second degree murder, first and second degree assault, firearm use in commission of violent felony, handgun on person, reckless endangerment, 8 murders, drug conspiracy, and witness intimidation. Prior to his arrest and conviction, this man was the #1 trigger puller in Baltimore. One victim's mother described him as the devil's child, saying that no one could be that evil. At the federal courthouse, downtown Baltimore, after his sentencing, the judge, Robert Herr, had this to say.
Mr. Baronet's crimes speak for themselves. It's difficult for me, and I think it's difficult for anyone, to really get inside the head of someone else, to understand what their life is like and what they're thinking. But I really return back just to the evidence and what the jury found Mr. Baronet liable for. The murders of 6 people. And to have one person responsible for that much death and that much destruction in a city, I'm just very glad that justice was done and he's been removed from the community.
Baronet, who maintained a calm disposition throughout the trial, apologized to the family of one of his victims, Antonio Addison, who was killed on the front steps of his grandmother's home. He had been suspected of cooperating with the cops. The victim's mother, Valencia Bullock, gave a victim impact statement, saying she relives the pain of losing her son every day. To that, Baronet said, "I apologize for the heartache and pain they believe I caused. He was a good friend. I gave him advice for staying off the streets. Baronet was found guilty of multiple charges. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 150 years in prison for other charges related to the conspiracy. The year is 1992, and the popular leader of a crime family is standing trial at a Brooklyn, New York court, where attorney I. Leo Glasser is the judge on duty.
The Don is covered with Velcro, and every charge in the indictment stuck.
These were the words of a New York FBI boss when popular crime mobster John Gotti was arrested and charged to court for his many crimes. Before then, he had been notorious for his ability to weave his way in and out of court. In a high-profile trial in 1992, John Gotti was charged with racketeering and murder. John Gotti, also known as the Teflon Don, was a notorious American mobster and the boss of the Gambino crime family in New York City from 1985 until his arrest in 1990. Gotti's criminal activities included extortion, loan sharking, gambling, and murder. The prosecution's case against Gotti relied heavily on the testimony of former associates, including Salvatore "Sammy the Bull" Gravano, who had become an FBI informant. Gravano testified that he had participated in numerous criminal activities with Gotti, including several murders, and that Gotti had personally ordered a hit on another gangster identified as Castellano. At first, it seemed that he would wriggle his way out of this one once again, but Gotti's luck had run out. This time, the evidence against him was overwhelming, and he was convicted on all counts. The trial was free of manipulation, as it had a major witness who had worked closely with the crime boss. Plus, the fact that the jurors were instructed to remain anonymous and only be identified by numbers. In 1992, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. John Gotti's crimes and his notoriety as a mob boss made him a symbol of organized crime in America, yet many in his community didn't see him as a criminal. This was obvious after his sentencing. When asked to comment about the life sentence, he declined to speak, but the voices outside were loud. There was a mob outside who insisted that the trial was rigged and that he had been wrongly convicted.
Those jurors were biased. I feel they had a very rotten trial, an unfair trial. This is worse than Russia.
That whole trial stunk from the beginning. You know, when one of us is accused of cheating, we're just considered low life. Is that what it is? When the government is, it's okay. But you know something? You know something? I just have one thing to say, and I don't want you to bother me. This is your government, all you people. It's about time that you stood up and took it back. And don't you see what's happening? Take it back. It's yours. It's mine. But I don't want it.
Hampton Superior Court is the location this time around, where the accused stands trial and awaits a final verdict from Judge Constance M. Sweeney. In 2015, Lee Rios, a notorious member of the Latin Kings gang, was charged with the murder of 18-year-old Kenneth Lopez in Springfield, Massachusetts. According to the prosecutors, the two were friends, but Rios had the motive to kill Lopez because of a dispute. After the shooting, Rios boasted about the killing to his fellow gang members, and not long after, he was picked up by the police and charged with the murder. The prosecution argued that Rios had shown no remorse for the crime and had a history of violence and gang activity. They also presented evidence to show that Rios had carefully planned the killing, including buying the gun used in the shooting and scouting out the location where Lopez was shot. During the trial, Rios had claimed he was not present at the time of the shooting. Still, the jury rejected his defense due to the amount of evidence found, including weapons and ammunition found in his apartment after a police search. His defense attorney also argued that the only evidence against him was the testimony of people who were seeking to get reduced sentences for their cooperation. However, the judge was not buying this.
Because there are few, if any, comments, Mr. Rios, that I can think of that would carry the full weight and import of the sentence that I'm about to deliver. As Attorney Stam has, I believe, correctly noted, yours will not simply be a sentence for life, but a very difficult one in light of the facts underlying this particular case.
Rios was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the sentence was read, Rios remained silent with his hands in cuffs at his back. He seemed to be bent on taking the sentence brazenly as he continued to look straight ahead, barely even blinking or giving any facial reactions. When the judge was done, Rios was ushered out of the court and maintained a calm but melancholic disposition. This case takes us to Los Angeles County with Judge Martin Herskovits. The Lopez Carpio brothers were charged to court for second-degree murder in the killing of 18-year-old Kevin Orellana. On January 23, 2013, a violent altercation took place between students on the campus of Cleveland High School in Reseda, California. The fight resulted in the fatal stabbing of 18-year-old Kevin Orellana by the Lopez Carpio brothers. According to the authorities, the fight was started by one of the Carpio brothers, who were members of a local street gang and had targeted Orellana because they believed he was a rival gang member. However, Orellana was not associated with any gang, and his death was later determined to be a case of mistaken identity. Anthony Carpio used a knife to stab Orellana multiple times in the head, neck, and torso, causing him to suffer fatal injuries. After the stabbing, the Carpio brothers fled the scene but were later arrested by the police. Following thorough investigations and a trial, both brothers were charged with second-degree murder. They were tried together in court, and on October 31, 2019, a jury found them guilty of the crime. Throughout the trial, they appeared defiant and indifferent, offering no apologies or showing any remorse. They sat leisurely, like they were in a cinema watching a movie play out, only that it wasn't a movie, and they were real-life antagonists with blood on their hands. The family of Kevin Orellana was present and issued a distraught victim impact statement. It was read by the Los Angeles County Deputy District Attorney, Scott Marcus.
As a parent, we plan to dance at their wedding, celebrate a promotion, look forward to possible grandchildren. The last thought we would ever have is that we will have to plan their funeral.
Anthony Carpio, who was 18 years old at the time of the incident, received a sentence of 16 years to life in prison. Michael Stephen Carpio, who was 20 years old at the time, was sentenced to 15 years to life. They will be ineligible for parole until at least 2028, but this sentence seemed to mean nothing to them.
It was a horrific crime. I am struck by the casualness in which it was committed, the absolute disregard for human life.
This is the Jefferson County District Court, where Acting United States Attorney Daniel P. Bubar and Special Agent in Charge Raymond Villanueva for HSI's Washington, D.C. field office announced the life sentence of a convicted murderer. His name, Abel Gallegos. Abel Gallegos was charged for multiple offenses, including murder, conspiracy to commit murder, second-degree kidnapping, retaliation against a witness, tampering with a deceased human body, and tampering with evidence. In November 2019, 28-year-old Simone Duran was kidnapped and killed in Jefferson County, Colorado. After the murder, Gallegos tried to dispose of Duran's body by setting it on fire. However, he was not successful, and her remains were found by a hiker. The motive for the kidnapping and killing appeared to be retaliation because she had identified one of the gang members, Alonzo Quintana, in a lineup following a murder investigation in Adams County in 2018. During the trial, the prosecution presented evidence to show that Gallegos had meticulously planned the murder. They also presented evidence to show that Gallegos had a history of violent behavior and gang activity. On the other hand, the defense argued that the evidence against Gallegos was circumstantial and that there was no direct evidence linking him to the murder. They also argued that Duran had been involved in drugs and gang activity and that the murder may have been related to that. During the sentencing hearing, Duran's family members spoke about the impact her death had on their lives. They described her as a loving mother, daughter, and friend with a bright future ahead of her. They also expressed relief that Gallegos had been held accountable for her murder. The sentence ensures that Gallegos will spend the rest of his life in prison, but his expressionless face gives the impression that he could care less. He paints the perfect picture of a hardened criminal.
This is where you will end up. With your family and friends crying as you're let out of the courtroom to serve the rest of your life in prison. And it may be symbolic, but I'm going to impose the maximum sentence just because you deserve it.
The judge handed down a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole for Duran's murder and an additional 163 years for the other charges. The victim impact statement talked about Duran's children, aged 3 and 4, who wake up at night crying for her.
They miss her and they ask about her every day.
What kind of man flashes a smile in court when he's facing hefty charges? Well, none other than George Thomas, arraigned at the Western Cape High Court, where Judge Chantal Fortuyn is presiding over the case. He is standing trial for several charges, including murder, racketeering, and drug trafficking. His nickname Jeweld means violence, and he, by all indications, lives up to that reputation. Thomas was a notorious South African gang boss who was known for his violent and ruthless criminal activities. He was the leader of the 28s Gang, one of the largest and most powerful criminal organizations in Cape Town. The notorious gangster was also involved in criminal activities from a young age and rose through the ranks of the 28s Gang to become its leader in the 1990s. Thomas was known for his extreme violence and was involved in numerous murders, assaults, and other violent crimes. He was also involved in drug trafficking and other illegal activities. In 2006, Thomas was arrested and charged with several counts of murder and other crimes. He was detained in several different prisons while awaiting trial, but this did not stop him from continuing his criminal activities. Using smuggled cell phones, Thomas was able to communicate with his gang members and orchestrate several murders, including those of potential state witnesses. Investigators revealed that he made over 30,000 phone calls, and at least 6 state witnesses were murdered as a result. He also intimidated and terrorized correctional service officials, turning the prisons into his personal headquarters. He stood trial with about 16 other gang members believed to be directly under the control of the gang boss, Thomas. While in court, he was often seen smiling and looking around like he was witnessing some form of circus performance. During the trial, only journalists were allowed to cross to the courtroom to ensure the protection of the other state witnesses. Despite the evidence against him, the gang leader continued to deny his involvement in the crimes. He even said that he only attacked prison guards after they assaulted him. After being found guilty, he was sentenced to 7 life sentences for each of the murders he was charged with, 3 in which he perpetrated by his own hands, and the other 4 which he instructed from prison. He was also sentenced to an additional 169 years in prison for the other charges.
Today, I'm gonna be brutally honest. I'm not saying I regret it but what I know for a fact, if I could have changed some things, I wouldn't be here where I am now.
Now, let's go to this Philadelphia court where a suspected rapist stands trial for a vicious crime. In November 2016, a man named Titus Lee was accused of brutally attacking 2 University of North Carolina Wilmington students in their apartment complex. He was charged with 2 counts of kidnapping, 2 counts of first-degree rape, robbery with a dangerous weapon, and first-degree burglary. According to the male victim's testimony in court, Lee, wearing a mask and wielding a gun, attacked him and his girlfriend as they were sitting on their apartment porch on Litchfield Way. Lee then allegedly tied them up in a closet while he raped the female victim. The crime lasted for hours, during which the victims revealed that they were driven to an ATM and forced to withdraw money for Lee. After the attacker left, the victims drove to the male victim's parents' house in Cherry Grove, South Carolina for help. They were terrified and traumatized by the event. The assailant was arrested 3 weeks later in Philadelphia by U.S. Marshals. During his trial, the jury found Lee guilty on all charges. The judge sentenced him to over 100 years in prison. 5 years after the gory ordeal, the victims finally got justice, and the female victim read out her impact statement in court.
I would like you to know that Nancy is responsible for my life being significantly harder than it was ever supposed to be. My innocence is now gone. I found myself harboring feelings of uncertainty and fear just by doing small things like going to the store or meeting a friend for dinner. Things that are supposed to be easier now are hard because I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting a man like him to be behind me.
District Attorney Ben David said Titus Lee will spend the rest of his life in prison. For the career prosecutors and detectives who handled this case, few of us can remember a worse crime of violence where the victims survived to testify. This was a hate-filled, hours-long crime spree that was gratuitous in its evil. And our last case takes us to Fulton County with Chief Judge Earl Glanville in charge of a murder trial where a husband and father was fatally shot. On August 18, 2018, Jaden Myrick, then 17 years old, robbed and fatally shot Christian Broder, a 34-year-old father, as Broder was leaving a wedding with his brother and friends. Myrick was later arrested and charged with murder, armed robbery, and aggravated assault. After attending a wedding, the group was waiting for an Uber outside the Capital City Country Club in Northeast Atlanta when Myrick, an admitted YSL gang member, approached them with a gun and demanded their belongings. After taking their valuables, Myrick shot Broder in the chest and fled the scene. Broder was transported to a nearby hospital but succumbed to his injuries. This is the same Young Slime Life gang which Grammy-winning rapper Young Thug is suspected of being a member of, as he currently stands trial in Fulton County District and has been in police custody since last year, 2022. Prosecutors are making links between other people suspected to be members of the gang and certain song lyrics in Young Thug's rap music.
You acknowledge that you've been accused of and arrested for robbing women.
Yes.
You acknowledge that you are the same person referred to as Tick in the song by Young Thug entitled You, in the verse She Getting Robbed by Tick.
Yes.
Myrick displayed carefree behavior in court as he refused to tender an apology to the family of the victim. Prosecutor Chris noted that Myrick had shown no respect for Broder's family and had refused to take responsibility for his actions. When asked if he had anything to say, the gang member said, Broder's family delivered emotional impact statements at the sentencing hearing, describing the devastating impact of his death on their lives. Prior to his sentencing, during the trial, Broder's father had begged the judge not to grant Myrick bond and instead keep him behind bars throughout the trial.
I just cannot understand why he would be allowed bond and to be released to the public.
After hearing testimony from both sides, the judge sentenced Myrick to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and 3 additional life sentences for his role in the armed robbery and assault of Broder's brother and friends. Thank you for watching this video. To see more videos like this, check out any of the 2 videos displayed on the screen.